Well, a very warm hello to our listeners, we hope. This is the Wayfaring Together podcast. I am Ben Miller. I'm a pastor on Long Island, and these are two young men I greatly enjoy and admire, my son Andrew and our very good lifelong friend Chris Harold. And we would like to take a moment now as we begin and kind of launch this thing and just talk a little bit about why this podcast. And we chose the title Wayfaring Together, and maybe it's as good a place as any to start just to talk about why wayfaring. So you young men, as you're launching your adult lives, and for me as I'm kind of well into mine, I think it's fair to say that all of us care quite a lot about life. We are trying to live well, and we know a lot of people. We're have lots of connections and trying to help other people live well, and even to think about what that really means. Like, what does it mean to live well? And we also have come to believe that talking about that is important together. Sharing our insights and reflections on what it means to live well. And I think wayfaring is kind of a helpful way to think about life, and also to think about our thinking about life. There's a guy named Alan Jacobs who wrote a book years ago called Wayfaring. And I heard an interview with him where he talked about this book, and it's a book of essays. And he was explaining, this sounds a little bit like out there, but he was explaining why he loves essays. And he said he loves essays because they're not huge books that take forever to read and try to reach these massive conclusions. They're just kind of thought experiments, and you just kind of mentally, as you're writing an essay or reading an essay, you just kind of ramble mentally meander through some thinking about something. But it's also not like a short blog post or what used to be called a tweet or whatever. It's not like a sort of a brain burst. It's actually an extended reflection on something. And it just struck me, and I think you guys, as we talked about this, have agreed that kind of working through an idea or walking through an experience of life or a season of life or just kind of walking through life in general, very often we don't have these kind of massive, comprehensive answers and conclusions about things. We're exploring. But there's a way to explore with some depth and some meaningfulness, where you're not just kind of reacting to things and having these sort of very short bursts of action and very short bursts of thought. You're actually thinking kind of in a somewhat more extended and truly exploratory way. And that's kind of like wayfaring. Like, a wayfarer doesn't just care about the big destination. The wayfarer cares about the journey. But it's also like you're not totally stopping and being distracted by everything, because you are actually moving. And so I think what we're trying to do in this podcast is just have some great conversations about life as wayfarers, to learn how to do sort of wayfaring together as in our conversations as we think about things, but also just hopefully help ourselves and others as we get back out into life, to kind of experience wayfaring through the world in a way that's thoughtful, but also is, I think, kind of modest, and realizes a lot of what we're doing is exploring and trying and, to some degree experimenting with things. And, the together point is just, we're always doing this with friends, and we are going to experiment in this podcast with trying to do this intergenerationally, that maybe older and younger generations can actually really learn from each other. So that's my kind of long-winded reflection on wayfaring. Interested in you guys' thoughts.
Yeah, we got you outnumbered generationally.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
The young outnumber the
you're gonna
old.
have to really work double time.
I'm gonna be it's gonna be competitive.
Yeah. I think the comparison between a wayfare and a journey, it's something we talked about before, and getting ready to do this podcast, and even with friends recently, we were having a conversation about, are we just focused on getting somewhere? And this was very existential and about life as a whole. And, we're Christians, so we were thinking about, how to build God's kingdom. And is it just that we're kind of going somewhere with that?
Just to pass them through.
Yeah, or we use the image of, do we build things on the bridge?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's an interesting thing. You can apply it to a lot. You can apply it to a conversation like this. Are we just trying to get a point across?
Yeah.
Or are we being intentional but still seeing what's going on? And there's a level of aimlessness that I think we would all agree is even far worse than being too obsessed with a destination, where you just have, no one would listen to this. We were
Mhm.
just kind of spouting off random nonsense.
Yeah.
So there's almost a measuredness, a middle ground
Yeah.
that I think Wayfaring shows. And it strikes me as very relational because for a journey or something that is very, very specific to where it's
Mhm.
going, not everyone can attach to that. You have
Mhm.
to, in business, it's like you have to find the people that are like really going for what you're going,
Mhm.
and then you all work hard together, and that's an important concept. But wayfaring, it's like you can join my wayfare. You don't have to be there the whole time.
Yep.
Maybe you will be with me the whole time because
Yep.
we're trying to get to some ideal rather than just some place.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That social part of wayfaring. Two wayfarers can join up even temporarily, and
Yeah.
because they both care about where they are. Again, I think that's what distinguishes a wayfarer from a pilgrim. A pilgrim is only interested in the destination. A wayfarer is really interested in the journey. And I think when you're interested in the journey, you can be interested in at least part of the journey together. And it's okay if you eventually, part ways or, end up thinking differently about something. But you've actually enriched each other, while you share the path. And I think that's in our world today something that actually is very much needed, is learning how to share the path of life and learn how to share the path of thinking about life, without everyone needing to sort of fit into this very, uh, always reach the exact same destination or always have the exact same kind of mode of travel.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, you guys kind of hit a lot of the points I was thinking of ahead of time, which leaves me kind of desperate. But
Well, go ahead.
I mean,
go ahead.
to what you were saying, I think that the difference between a wayfarer and just somebody who's on the road is a lot of intentionality.
Yeah.
A lot of awareness of not just like how you're going about what you're doing, but also what's going on around you, what other people are doing around you. Maybe even people who are outside of your wayfaring group. Yeah, just a lot of mindfulness.
Yeah, purpose.
Yeah, mindfulness is a big thing, I feel like. I mean, that's a big hot button word when it comes to the mental health scene. But there really is something to that. The awareness of where you're at. I think if I could speak for my young people, I think it's probably true of all generations. There's a level of dissatisfaction that people have with themselves and where they are in life, just like kind of universally most of the time. I am young and I am friends with mostly young people, so that's what we talk about. Even yesterday, I spoke to a good friend of mine, and we were both lamenting. Like, I was lamenting how when I was being raised as a child, I wish people were more supportive of my artistic endeavors, and not that people weren't, but I was just saying, I wish people recognized what they had in me. And he was like, he ended up going to school for like computer animation, and now he works in logistics and sales. And he was like, I wish people told me not to go into the arts. And it was just this funny like opposite thing. We were both reflecting on how we were feeling disappointed in ourselves, and we kind of both went through kind of funnily inverse paths of each other, and then we ended up kind of where we wished we had the environments of the other. It was just very interesting because in the concept of a journey or something that's very focused, that is like a total waste of time to go through something like that. And it's almost like you have to see your story in life or any individual event that happens in your life as whether or not it feeds your end goal or it was a negative and an L. So there's dubs and L's.
Exactly.
It's not about optimization.
Yeah, in a wayfare, it's not that you're going nowhere. It's that this is where you're at.
Yeah.
So see what's going on here, and you can move on.
Yeah.
But there's a different approach. Instead of this is an L, I got to optimize. I got to min-max. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Using some Gen Z language. So.
I'm totally lost. So flesh out the optimization point. So, I think what I hear you saying is there's almost a kind of desperation about, I'll go back to the pilgrim thing, like just fixated on the destination, because it's kind of what's the straightest line to that destination, right? It's the road is only a means to get there. A wayfarer has a much more, I think, a much more accepting approach to the journey. Like the journey itself is good, but also I think is comfortable with the fact that a wayfarer's destination is just a little bit less definite. There's
Mm.
kind of weaving, you take byways, sometimes you end up with just total curves in the road you did not see at all, and you actually sometimes not even sure you're aiming at the original destination anymore. Maybe now we've got a new destination, and the wayfarer kind of can flex with that. I think in a way the pilgrim can't, because the destination is so definite. And I'm interested, like you're bringing out this optimization point, which sounds to me like kind of a psychological burden, where again, if everything's about point your nose to your destination and just get there, then of course you want to make everything along the way as efficient as possible. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, I think one of the clarifications we have as Christian wayfarers that, provides answers you might have to find elsewhere if you weren't, is just that, at the end of the day, everything is in God's hands. There's, a plan that we cannot see, we could not account for, we could not really contribute to an extent. And there's kind of a pursuit of optimization that can come with travel preparation.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work in life, like a one-off vacation where it's a very like isolated situation where you can kind of control a lot of the variables is one thing. Even still, there are things that if they happen, you had no way of really preventing them. But yeah, hopefully that answers.
No, that's actually really, I think, really insightful. There's a verse in James's letter that I think about a lot, especially as I get older, I think. And he's talking to people that have big plans. And he says, woe to you who say, tomorrow we're going to go into this and that place, and we're going to buy and sell and get a bunch of money, make a bunch of profit. And he says, whereas you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we'll live tomorrow and do this or that. And it's just kind of this little, like, sort of gut check about, like, kind of like, as you said, sort of sovereignty, like who's actually running this thing. But I think to your point about optimization, it's that sense of like, I've planned my journey, I've accounted for all the variables, and I'm just going to get there and do the thing.
Yeah, and now I'm ready to do it.
And then, what we Christians call providence happens, and all of a sudden you realize, well, you forgot this, and your car broke down here, and suddenly something leaped out of the bushes you have to contend with, just as like wayfaring.
Yeah, that's actually a really powerful point, because I think it frames the idea of wayfaring, or however we imagine moving through our lives, in I would think a more Christian sense, because really it's God's providence is another. It's much bigger than us, but it's another way He relates to us, and we can connect with Him. So we're just trying to be ready for our path, and God's providence leads us in various different ways. We could see that as, He's pruning us and frustrating us for our development, which is true. But at the same time, imagine we're walking through some environment. A part of it is pausing to see the beauty and just what God is doing and the environment He's crafting with our lives and with things outside of our lives. And it almost means that as we continue to live, it's just a method by which we're appreciating what God does in us, as opposed to just having goals and trying to go through the process of God pruning us in order to get to those goals, which is a very real thing.
Yes.
But I don't know. I feel like I clumsily explained that.
No, that's actually really
But there's
good.
like some awe to.
Yeah.
When I think of wayfaring, I think of a guy with a stick with rolling hills, and he's looking around. You know, he's like really admiring it.
Well, I think that's basic to wayfaring. I think you wayfare in places that you know are good. You're there to see things. You're there to pay attention. Again, you're not just rushing through. And I think for a Christian, although I don't think you have to be a Christian actually to sense this quite deeply, a sense that being and the world, like, it's fundamentally good. That's why we react to things that are bad. It's why things that are bad strike us like this discordant note, because there is this sort of deep, strange human sense that what is most basic is harmony and beauty and goodness, and things that deviate from that are just bad. and when you like have a sense that the world and the being of things is good, then I think you are prepared, like you're saying, where when God, throws a curve in my path, maybe it's not all about just kind of like, making me the best version of myself to get where I need to go. Maybe he's just telling me to stop and just kind of pay attention.
It's a lot less about me.
Yeah.
Like me walking through this path is a lot more to do with what's around me
Yes.
than even me.
Yes.
Which I think is also essential to the wayfaring aesthetic, which is
Yeah.
why we gravitated to that particular word.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's also a certain pacing that is really important.
Hmm.
There's a lot of emphasis, I believe, in the Bible of really like sitting and just reflecting and meditating on what it is you have in front of you.
Selah.
Yeah.
Selah.
And it's funny because the wayfaring process of instigating that into your life does end up returning and positively influencing your ability to do certain kinds of repetitive, strenuous life
Mm-hmm.
actions in your day to day.
So, since we're meandering through this conversation in a wayfaring sort of way, let me just camp there for a second, if you don't mind, because this would be a question I would have for younger generations.
Hmm.
How much, I don't quite know how to ask this in the most precise way, but how much life quality do you feel like is compromised by just the sheer hurriedness of modern life?
Much.
Now, I feel that acutely, but that could be just because I'm not yet acclimated. But I wonder, like, do young people in general, would you say, do they feel that life is just happening very, very fast, where it's almost difficult to sort of have both the external calm, but also the internal composure to pay attention? Almost like we're on a bullet train through life. It's just kind of like so hard to see the scenery.
I would I mean, this is my take, and I'm interested to know what you have to say on this, but I would go so far as to say it feels like we've kind of overcorrected our pacing. It feels like there's kind of a middle ground between the societal default now and like 40 years ago that kind of balances the kind of fast-paced filtering you're able to do in your day and be like you can be a lot more intentional, get a lot more done, and there's a lot of positives that come with kind of the overwhelming age of information and everything. But I do pretty frequently find myself and find people around me wanting to be moving slower,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be able to soak in the days, not just get through them for the sake of a dollar or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And to add to that, which I would broadly agree, I think there's a weird sort of paradoxical sensation that comes with that. And it's hard to generalize for young people as a whole, but a lot of the people I talk to as well, they have that sentiment that they want to experience a slower form of life. But I feel that they feel that they have no choice because the broad strokes of life come at them so slowly that they have to move so quickly in the details in order to make anything happen. I think people feel this in education, where a bachelor's degree is so irrelevant now, and it's a decade of education will really move the needle, or you have to really grind in a lot of areas to push it. And economically, young people feel like they're so far out of the game, and it's like, how do you even step foot? Or even socially, it's like you're so far removed from where you might want to be that you have to live a very fast life to feel like you're getting anywhere.
So, one of the things that I think is a real contribution of Marxist thought, I'm not a Marxist, but I think this is a real contribution, is just attention to the material conditions in which life happens and how those material conditions really do affect our whole formation as persons. And this is something I wonder about. So you're talking about how there's this pressure, like you kind of have to keep up.
I think young people feel so much pressure.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's certainly my impression. And a lot of it is because of benchmarks. Like normal people have hit this benchmark by this time. Successful people have hit this benchmark by this time. And a lot of it revolves around, frankly, material conditions. Like, have you made enough money? Can you afford? Can you? And I think that's become more complicated because the world is less, at least where we are, less affordable by far. And so there's just this kind of pressure to, as you're saying, hurry, because you don't want to get to 30 and have gaping holes in your resume, or kind of not have your financial stuff together, or whatever. My sense is sometimes young people actually live frenetically burdensome lives trying to hit all the benchmarks.
And I mean, a lot of the hindrances developed alongside psychologists now. There's not only more to keep you distracted, entertained, whatever. And again, it's made to keep you as interested as possible. Your attention is a asset now.
Interesting. So on top of the pressure, there's also this kind of sucking, algorithm-driven, ultimately monetized draw on your attention, which arguably makes it, even if you really were going to take on the burden of meeting all of these benchmarks that supposedly successful people are supposed to meet, it would be so much harder because there's so many voices, so many distractions, so many things. I mean, many of these things are quite enjoyable, but they can make it very difficult to stay on. They can end up making you meander much more than maybe people did in the past because they just had fewer things to pull them off the path.
Yeah, they can. They absolutely can. I don't think that it's unavoidable. I don't think there's not a million ways to even do avoidance. But it is definitely, it's more of a roadblock, I think, now than it was.
Because we talked before, the three of us, about there's a book by a Jesuit writer, Michel Desserteau, I think is his name. It's called The Practice of Everyday Life, and one of the things that he distinguishes in that book that was quite illuminating for me is between maps as we know them today, and the scribbled itineraries from which maps in the medieval ages were ultimately composed. So there was a time when there weren't big world maps. People had marked out journeys they had taken. And maps then became a way of kind of getting this bird's eye view of the territory that you'd never really been in. Right? So you could know a lot about things where you'd actually not actually been there. And it kind of was abstracted from experience. And I wonder if one of the things that a lot of young people feel pressure from today is that there's supposedly, again, these big maps. And, a successful journey in this territory is sort of, marked on the map. As opposed to the ability to just be where you are, not without guidance. Because I think a life where there are no inputs of guidance ends up having to reinvent a lot of stuff because you just don't get to draw on the wisdom of those who have traveled before you. Like, I want an itinerary given to me by someone who has walked this path. But the difference with an itinerary is I take it and then I get to walk. And I can, in a way, if I deviate from the itinerary, that's just fine, because that's what an itinerary is. It's a footpath. It's walking through, something. Like in education, for example, the ability to pursue the learning of something because I just happen to find it incredibly interesting, as opposed to truly educated people know, this whole, this whole educational map of. Now, I do wonder if some of that, some of those big, like in education, I think some of those big maps have probably receded in how much they're considered like standard now. But still, you think about how much test taking in school is about learning how to take tests, because you have to check these boxes in order to get the piece of paper in order to become financially marketable or whatever. This kind of map of life, as opposed to just being able to kind of like do life on the ground. And then maybe write your itinerary, because somebody might come behind you and learn something from the path you've walked. But it's not like giving someone this, one size fits all. Here's the whole map of the territory of life. I've just found that very, very. I just feel like that's a very suggestive metaphor of. Have we lost the ability to kind of just practice itineracy because there's almost a compulsion to follow what's marked on the map.
Or utterly rebel against what's marked on the map.
Exactly.
And go the no guidance method.
Exactly.
Or I guess we could call it the misguided method.
Unschooling.
Yes. Sure. Which there are people guiding those ideas.
Right.
I think, again, that's sort of a middle ground concept of not following an exact map. The itinerary thing, it's very interesting. We talked about this previously. It's very subjective, and it's not the kind of evidence that has a lot of power to convince. Like, if I give you an itinerary and say, Bobo's Burgers is the best, and it's just my review versus, 5,000 reviews saying you're better off at McDonald's, then, we weigh the quantitative review higher. But there's so much decision-making and intention when it comes to even just a single... It's really a story. It's a lived story.
It is.
I actually think that there's great modern sensation for the story. Even the most genius of corporate marketers will say that people want to see a story in their ads. Whether or not they convey this in a compelling way is up for debate. But I think... I don't know. I never lived in other generations, but I think especially now, there's so much discussion of what a story is and how do you make a compelling one. I think the itinerary touches on that in a powerful way.
Yeah, agreed. Because it is so specific to the particular journey. But it is a way of marking the path that I have walked, because that matters. I did find along the way there were better and worse things, and that's not purely subjective. I mean, sometimes I remember walking into a wall and I really had to turn left.
Yeah.
So the guy behind me might want to know this, who doesn't come down this alley.
That's actually true. Personal, I think we and I just did just now. It's so in my language. Personal does not necessarily mean subjective in the way that we think of subjective. I think we apply subjective to a little too much. So I would say we kind of broadly. So that's just...
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the idea that something is personal could almost be interpreted as meaning it's purely relative now. It has no, there's nothing there for someone else. Everything personal about our lives has something for someone else, but it's not a tourist's guide, all sensible people go to these places and see these things. It's more of just saying, I have been here, let me tell you what I've experienced here. This is my story, but it's a story that could have meaning for you. And I think this is part of, wayfaring together, is just sharing our itineraries in life and being comfortable with the fact that your itinerary is your itinerary, because your story is your story. And I think that's where this kind of standardization of the modern world and these, all people are supposed to meet these benchmarks, I think it creates a lot of pressure because our lives are not standardized. They invariably have variables that are not true of any other story. But that's almost a problem now, it seems to me.
Yeah, that sounds like a very generational thought. You as someone who's sort of given itineraries to younger people for many decades now. Yeah. I think the awareness in this generation of what is normal, we weren't aware of as much when I was young. You tended to, if you wanted to know what was normal, you looked at your schoolmates, you looked at your neighborhood, you looked at stuff happening around you. But now we're also aware of what's normal almost globally. And I think that has created, again, I'm kind of back to this idea of big maps. I think it's just made it harder to kind of be okay with your particular personal story and itinerary and just kind of try to really do that well without comparing it to everything you see that everyone else, quote unquote, is doing. And it's just much more visible now what everyone else is doing. I think it creates pressure. My world was just a lot smaller. I mean, almost incomprehensibly smaller living now. Like, I think back on what life was like for me as a 14-year-old
boy um, in the 80s, and it is actually almost incomprehensible now how small your world just naturally was. How much you did not know about, even if you watched the news and didn't care about because it just wasn't relevant.
Right now, our sphere of influence is Earth-sized.
Earth size.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And
When-
it feels normal now.
It is almost seen as wrong to not have an Earth-sized perspective. It is seen kind of as an ignorant thing. If you make any public comment at being, oh, I don't care about politics or whatever, you actually get slammed for
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And-
That's one of those benchmarks that I frankly find mystifying from my background, which is you almost are supposed to have a platform. Nobody thought that way in my world when I was a teenager, because like what is you wanted to have status with your peer group where you lived. But the idea of having a platform in any kind of like, the people that had the microphones were like big shots. We all knew we were not that.
Yeah. When I was 14, I genuinely believed that I was capable of changing the world.
Yeah.
Like that's
Which
where I
is-
started to think that.
Like, chops. That's cool, but
Which is, I mean, but there's the positive side and there's
Yeah.
the pressure side.
yeah.
I don't
Mm.
know, Andrew. You tell
Yeah.
me.
I'm thinking a lot about the connectivity portion of it, and just how much access we have to other people, their perspectives, their opinions about their life, their sphere, and things outside of their sphere. And it's interesting because on the flip side you have the dynamic that you're talking about, but on the other side you have kind of this. Oh, I would even go so far as to call it kind of like a pseudo wayfaring, where it's kind of like a shell that you get from, you come across a video and they're talking about some super specific like emotional state based off of a super specific set of circumstances, and you're like, wow, I actually fully relate to that.
Mhm.
And then like so did like 300,000 other people, and they're all talking about it in depth with more specifics about their specific situation. Like, wow, there's a lot of people going through what I'm going through. It's almost like it's not as hard to go through it. Again, kind of like a pseudo wayfaring.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have all the negatives. And I do think that in general, the negatives outweigh that positive, because again, all of that wayfaring is happening outside of your sphere of relevance.
Well, so that's interesting. So if wayfaring together is something we all really deeply basically desire, to not be alone on the road, I think what you're saying is it's very interesting, because yes, it's true. When everyone is supposed to have a microphone, it means too many people probably have microphones.
Yeah.
Maybe the three of us shouldn't have a microphone. But the flip side of everyone having microphones is that probably a lot more people feel heard,
Mm-hmm.
because somewhere in that cacophony of voices, you're going to hear someone that speaks and you're like, yeah, I totally resonate with that. And I think that is, look, that would be another way I would say generationally, the world's quite different now. When I was young, it was very, very possible to feel like you just were weird in your circle and you just kind of were the weird one. Now, maybe you didn't feel hugely weird because you didn't feel weird compared to like a million people. You felt weird compared to like, the 300 people you knew.
Mm.
But you still felt very weird. And if somebody in that, group of people that you knew didn't get you, you just felt not gotten. And it could be very isolating. I think that's part of why a lot of so-called mental health issues just even weren't even diagnosed in those days. You're just a person that just had issues and people didn't understand, and you just kind of struggled along. Now, you can label it. There's all these voices that will tell you what the label is and why it, arguably why it is, and there's real upsides to that.
Yeah. There's a lot of generalization that goes on in mental health talk that I think is unhelpful for people who have their heads screwed on straight and for people that don't. In the case that both of those people have mental health issues. Um,
And I think
Totally.
again, it's partly because in an itinerary, you are somewhere with your feet on the ground, surrounded by actual circumstances. And I think one of the things that can get lost, mental health being just one example of this, I actually think this could broaden out into all kinds of other areas, but is a sense that it's not okay to work on your issue if you have an issue, or to enjoy your thing just with your local people.
yeah.
Because like there, even like take a mental health issue, like anxiety. It's not like this general thing that you have so much as you have to work out your anxiety in particular relationships in a particular place on an itinerary, right? You have
Hmm.
anxiety on this itinerary, as opposed to this almost like very kind of
Yeah,
clinical,
clinical is the word. Yeah.
you know, thinking of everything so abstractly, like life, whether it's with anxiety, so that's maybe like a negative thing we deal with, or just something you enjoy. Like, why couldn't you just have your own tastes and preferences that you just enjoy without needing to necessarily feel like you need to connect it to some, like, big movement or whatever, or, whether that's a trending? Like, who cares? If you enjoy it, just enjoy it, like, and I think that's where the itinerary thing, like just living life on the ground. And I don't know how, this is a whole other conversation for another time, but like I don't know how this works out so easily in the digitized world, because most of us are not offline, just hanging out with people in a place anymore. Our lives totally have this online component, and you are going to be much more aware of kind of big, trends and movements and what the big conversations are. I do think it creates pressure, and I think it can make you feel sort of bad if your little local experience of something doesn't kind of conform to the big norms.
Mm. That's actually what you were just saying about the clinical versus the itinerant is really, really interesting. I think something that the big conservative voices have really dangerously gotten wrong is that such an emphasis on the truth of certain principles, which is obviously important in a philosophical and theological sense, and in every sense, truth is important, right? But what is helpful is a component of what is accurate. So,
Mm-hmm.
what applies
Mm-hmm.
to me and my mental health struggle is just as relevant as what is my mental health struggle clinically, what are the recommended ways to address it. It's worth knowing all those things. But there's, again, kind of back to that subjectivity that
Mm-hmm.
it ends up
Yes.
not really being subjective. It
Yep.
ends, and this can start to sound a little bit like the my truth stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which I think we and hyper conservatives would rightfully push back on. But there is an element, I've been reflecting on this a lot recently.
Mm.
There's an element that sounds a lot like an itinerary where it's not saying that there is no objective reality and whatever I think, feel, or experience trumps whatever is the case beyond me, because you still have that awareness I'm in an environment.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the sense of, well, I do happen to be on a particular path,
Yep.
having particular experiences,
Yep.
and there is a kind of truth that applies to me that might not necessarily be truthful in other
Yep.
situations for other people.
Yep. I think that's profound. I've actually said, it's probably a wild overstatement. I've actually said I don't think we really believe in diversity in the modern world. We kind of have a problem with
Mm.
diversity. We really we love standardization,
Mm.
and I think that the sort of epistemological, or in the realm of like truth claims, what you're saying, the way that works out is, okay. So yes, it is true that there is truth, and part of just sanity is being able to have my thinking to some degree conform to truth. Like if there's no reality to which my brain has to conform, then I'm actually lost in the vat of my own brain, and I'm really lost.
It's very
Right?
dangerous. Yeah.
Well, it is actually insanity. However, how truth is true is so situated.
Mm.
What truths get emphasized, because not all truth is shouting with the same volume all the time, right? Like there's truths. There
Mm.
are many truths, and sometimes certain truths need to be just. This is true in the aesthetic realm. You know,
Oh.
which we could have a whole other conversation. But yeah, so when you think about value, like value judgments, whether they're aesthetic or moral or epistemological, yes, I think we need to have room for what truth looks like embodied on the ground in these circumstances. Like somebody once said, we don't believe in situational ethics in a purely relativistic sense, but we totally believe in contextual ethics, because when you think about what is good in any situation, what's happening matters, right? Like deeply matters. The good is to some degree shaped to your circumstances, not in a relativistic way. And I think in the realm of truth, that's also just really worth reflecting on. Like, you take almost any truth, and it's not like this kind of abstract thing floating in the ether. It's anyway. I'm just trying to riff on what you're saying, and I think there's a lot there.
That's absolutely brilliant riff. It's got me thinking a lot. It to me, it's starting to sound a lot like grace.
Yes,
which is kind of, in one way, wielding truth with wisdom.
Yeah,
is one way to think of grace, and that's obviously very relational in sort of the wayfaring together element. That is very interesting, and I think about what you were saying, with the good and the bad of the digital. I feel like for me, my truth, I don't think I could have been alive in any other generation.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like technology accelerating in directions I don't really fancy, and I'm glad I'm going to die in a few decades.
Before it gets completely wonky.
Yeah, I could not tolerate any previous centennial period of history. I absolutely, I love the internet.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of negative stuff, but I actually, I will come out here and say, I think positive outweighs negative here. I'm pretty happy, actually.
Well, so that's a perfect illustration of how a truth, just you have to pay attention to what it looks like as it actually lands. So we would all agree that it is true, it is a very, very important truth that what is good should not be dictated by what is possible. Right? So technological advances, scientific advances, they're powerful because they are pushing the bounds of the possible. At some point, we would all agree, pushing the bounds of the possible has now actually corrupted the good. Something may be possible and not be good.
Absolutely.
And if you only have the possible as your standard, that's just a truth. We would all agree. But does that truth mean that the internet is bad? Because it's very easy for people to take a general truth, which is we need to be careful that the possible doesn't completely overwhelm the good, and bring that into the discussion of the goodness or badness of the internet. And say, well, they're just constantly, doing more and more because it's possible, and, algorithms and AI, and therefore there's somehow this inherent sense that we must somewhere in here automatically almost be corroding the good. And I think the reality is maybe. I mean, I think I could make a case that certain digital things that have been developed because they're possible, and they open up possibilities in a way that has not taken account of what's good for people. But you kind of have to break that down and talk about what we're actually talking about, and not just make a truth claim, universalize it.
Right, the generalization or the clinical.
Like my generation was just clearly living better than your generation. It'd be very easy to take certain truths and just have that be like the truth claim, and of course that's just I don't even want to call it a map. It certainly is not paying attention to what's happening in the itinerary.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I am curious to your thoughts on that. I just want to weigh that. I feel like the one thing that is very true of the modern age, we could call it, is that the individual, like we're talking about, everyone's got a microphone, is so much more influential and can do so much more. And now we got AI and all, and I don't even want to talk about that.
Right.
It just seems like there's a greater demand for wisdom, and that the tools are so advanced, but so easy to control. So they're incredibly powerful. Whereas maybe when we were younger, it was like you had to learn how to code if you want to do real technology.
Well, that's the thing
Yeah.
I see in your generation is that powerful tools are democratized. There was a time when, there was a huge economic fuss over who held sort of the means of production
Yes.
because they had the power.
Right. Now
Now
you
it's
don't
like
need.
there for almost, I want to not overgeneralize, but like most people have access to means of production that is just unprecedented in world
Yeah,
history.
like anyone is on the table to do something
Yes.
extraordinarily
Yes.
remarkable on a large scale. Which there's a lot we could say about that, but I think that the need for wisdom and knowing and discerning between good and bad, not to get too theological, but the need for that discernment, I think, is not that it was ever lesser, but I think it's so magnified now as a result of that. Because I think about, there's a lot of AI stuff, and I certainly do not want to talk about AI, at least right now.
Agreed.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But there's so much to be said, but so much is possible for an individual. And in my mind, it's like, well, we can't delete the technology.
Right.
That's just not going to happen.
Right.
And the technology is doing things that I also like a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to keep that. So now it's just, you got to hope that people make the right decisions, which has been a terrible strategy. But it also is like, isn't that kind of the wayfare of humanity in a certain sense?
Yeah.
So I know I'm just like
No,
taking
no,
us everywhere, but
No, it's not. I mean, it's good stuff. I mean, we don't get to pick our time. We don't get to pick the conditions that apply in that time. We have to learn to adapt. That is wisdom.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that the same goes for, opportunities to display wisdom to others. Very much so. I think there's a lot of, I would, this is definitely a generalization that is unfair for me to make about my generation, but I I get this vibe, if you will, that a lot of the people in my generation are kind of hesitant to demonstrate their wisdom, as in a lot of cases, to people from older generations, um, especially people who actually have wisdom, because of the attitude towards Gen Z people and their opinion about what is perceived as their opinion, their personal truth about X, Y, or Z, when in reality they're like, I actually know more about this,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that does extend to people in the same generation as well, probably for similar reasons, like stemming from the same upstream, but
So it's interesting. I'm watching a couple of documentaries on the year 1968. This was the year of, in major cities around the globe, major youth rebellions, public demonstrations, many of them anti-Vietnam War, and the 60s were a time when a lot of values were changing. And the thing the youth were saying to their parents in that time was that you just don't get what's happening. The times, Dylan was right. The times, they are a changing, and you cannot keep up. You're post World War II, kind of, liberal, consumerist, capitalist, bubble, with all of its kind of, neat social mores. That world is gone, and the military industrial complex that kind of came out of the World War II era, like that, is just destroying things that have immense value. And there's all of this anti-war, and obviously a lot of sexual liberation, and just the times were changing. And I feel like your generation in some ways is living in a more technological version of that, where like someone who had been part of the World War II generation really did not get the young people, and the world of the young people of the 60s really didn't. These were actually different worlds. This was not just a kind of, all generational shifts have had some tension, but like this was like
it was global societal difference.
Global societal difference. Maybe in a way that was unprecedented historically. Although you can make the case, well, that's happening, I think, again, where people show graphs of cultural change, and like the difference between people's lives in 1700 and 1900. Okay, there was change, but it was like this, and then all of a sudden, like you get to the late 20th century and into the early 21st century, and the graphs. I mean, it's just on on in every category, it's just like spikes. And so I do think you're right. I think one of the things in sort of intergenerational wayfaring is it's kind of hard to have mutually respectful, open conversations because I mean the world now is genuinely a different place, and it is the escalation of that change has been hard to keep up with for even for my generation, and I'm the generation that straddles that change. Um, your grandparents' world, I mean, there's a sense in which that world no longer even exists.
Yeah. I and it's funny. I feel like there's always this butting of heads that happens over the generalized concept that like it's difficult or heaven forbid more difficult to deal with things in each generation. Um
When I was your age, I
Yeah.
had 4
Like,
kids.
When I walked uphill both ways to school.
it's basically like it's a battle between I can't, I'm struggling because I actually have no choice. This is all I have to do in front of me. There's no distractions, and that's hard. Or I actually have more distractions than I could ever be distracted by, and that's hard. And
When we had anxiety, we just tied him to a bowling ball and left him in the lake.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And it's like, dude, no, like,
yeah, it's like, well,
that's like insulting.
that is the thing that you would do if you didn't.
You've never heard this from me, Andrew. Anything like this?
No. Um,
But then it's also like, dude, come on, like, you're alive, like, make a move. So
Yeah, well, I think this is
yeah.
where, to get back to the itineraries thing, I think we need to have some intergenerational itinerary conversations. I don't think everything that my generation walked is useless to yours. There is no question you guys are in a different. You're making your itineraries in just a very different world.
I think that we need a new kind of wisdom that is additive to the wisdom that we can get from previous generations. Like, we're not gonna need the wisdom of previous generations less just because things have changed. We're just gonna need an additional wisdom.
Yes.
yeah, well, I think
that's what a lot of Gen Z people miss.
yeah, I agree with that. I think Gen Zers are like like for our early years of life, we all heard all the boomer wisdom. So then when we encountered new problems, it was just more boomer wisdom, and it was like, I got that. Like the stuff
Right.
that was good, I
Right.
already took, and
Right,
it got
right.
me this far.
Right.
That's what's interesting. We're totally generalizing at this point,
Yeah.
but I
Somewhat
find
unfair.
that Zers grandparents, the Zers love grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people from the completely different world are adored by the young people because it's like, oh, we like fantasize, like there are YouTube videos with millions of views, and it's just a guy being like a 7-year-old giving some word of advice. And
I love those videos.
I love those videos too.
I saved most of them.
And a lot of times it's like it's simple but insightful stuff that the boomers are like, they think that they're doing.
Keep talking. I have an example that I screenshotted.
Pull it up. And so I think that the Zers love that.
Yeah.
The boomers are hated, obviously, and the Xers are up for grabs. I think it depends on like who's really working with it. But it's interesting that there's almost like the transitionary generations that didn't maybe know how to handle what was happening have left the younger people who are like in it, like, you don't know what you're talking about, like, but the guy's like, I don't know what about an Instagram or whatever, but like when I had to put my dog down, and it's like, that's wisdom.
That's like that's deep wisdom.
Yeah.
The video I'm thinking of, it's funny. The video itself wasn't really like a wisdom bait moment. It was just kind of like a slideshow of this old dude, and it was just like stills of little parts of like his day or his week or something, and it was like, oh, very refreshing. He was, you could tell he was finding the joy in just like the little things. Like there's him with a big smile on his face and a big old slice of pizza, and he's just like, I should take a picture of this and add it to my collage.
Right.
And there was there's a lot of people in the comments probably from my generation, our generation, who were asking questions, and Unk was a common nomenclature
Unk is
for
the
him.
term now. Yeah.
Somebody put in, does it ever get easier in life, Unk? And he goes, no, but you get better at hard things. It's those kinds of responses that I think are, what's it called? That are desirable. There's a lot of times where the response would be something more along the lines of, oh, well, you don't have it as hard for this reason, or stop complaining because we had it this way when we were, at least it's not this.
I
Right?
think pain measuring conversations just ought to just be like,
there's
retired.
always going to be hard stuff.
Yeah,
You get
life is
better
hard.
at it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was the attitude. I think in like the early 20th century rather.
Yeah.
And
well, the Depression generation, for example. I mean, they
so
just
the wisdom that is coming from them is very similar. It's like, look, man, it's hard. You get better at that.
Yep.
As opposed to get better at it,
mm-hmm.
which is different.
Well, but you think, okay, so, I mean, maybe we need to, like, save this for another episode, but, like, this is, the boomer generation, too, you think about it, like, they were the ones, in many ways, in the 60s, who were like, we're going to fix the world.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't the Depression era generation that had to figure out how to deal with, famine and war. They were like, we're going to end war and have, like, all this,
yeah.
we're all going to sing and, dance around in the flowers and have peace.
We're going to steer left and hit the other ditch.
Yeah, and then my generation was like, growing up in just this very weird, like the 80s were weird. We'll talk about the 80s another time. But it was kind of a strange, like the boomer, by the 80s, the 60s had kind of like, a lot of the youthful, beautiful, idealistic stuff had kind of faded into this kind of late Cold War, then post-Cold War, on trying to figure out like what the world was kind of post-Cold War. And then, by the mid-90s, you suddenly have this weird thing called the World Wide Web. And all of a sudden, like, the world is really changing. And I think a lot of Gen Xers just have a lot of angst because, like, we had none of the joy of the hippie generation. And we didn't understand what was going on with the digital generation. And, just kind of this, the boomers were our moms and dads. And
you got like the end of the stick and literally the end of the shame, basically, from the freedom generation with all of the instability of just constant change.
Yeah, and I'll save you the Gen X pity party, but it was a weirdly transitional generation. So I think, the boomers, you say what you will about them, but yeah, I can understand how the Zoomers almost like want to jump over the Gen Xers and boomers, like talk to like the people that kind of like did almost like, I mean, almost a little bit of, Leave It to Beaver. Not Return to the 50s, but just kind of that salt of the earth, how do you put down a dog?
Yeah, that really seemed. Yeah, well, you won me over. I feel terrible for you and your Gen Xers.
Oh yes, well, good. If nothing else, out of this episode, we get pity for the Gen Xers. That's mission accomplished.
But to kind of like, I'm like so fascinated with the generational stuff, but to put it in sort of the scope of the Wayfaring together idea. Well, I don't know. I'm taking us low. I'm taking us below the clouds, but it's turbulence. I think the generational conversations, we've been touching on that. Something I think we can all agree kind of went wrong in the raising of Gen Z by the Xers and the Boomers and, heaven forbid, millennials who did that. Is it even possible?
Talk about the millennials.
Yeah. Often forgotten.
They don't get a conversation.
Yeah, they're not. Never mind. I'm gonna.
But, I think that those conversations are necessary. The itinerary, I think, is such a good example of a generational sort of thing. You have to have done it before to offer an itinerary. So there's value in doing things because of your life and in God's eyes, and then your ability to bring that to someone younger, to someone who's following that. That's very valuable. And I think this is a very rote concept, but I think it starts with listening.
Yeah.
I think that in my experience, my truth, again, here I come.
But your experience.
Having a mic. Yeah, my experience, okay?
Yeah. No, that's...
I got a microphone and I got an experience. All right,
go.
This is it, okay?
This is for.
I was surrounded by much love in my life. It's not lack of love, but I often felt that even when I was being heard, I wasn't being listened to.
Yeah.
And I kind of, even now, I just feel bouts of like, am I like totally alone?
Yeah.
In like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty common feeling. And I think that in the young people feeling that way, we've totally alienated the older people who are like, they don't listen to me, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And then it's like, well, what even is my whole life now?
Mhm.
Because we were obsessed with our kids and the future and the world that we were making. And now it's all gone blue hair. And,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of, it's not looking too good.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I guess my attempt to bring this plane to the ground is listening well.
Yeah.
How does that
Mhm.
factor in?
Yes.
And am I on the right track?
100%.
Well, I can honestly say I don't think I have any greater passion for this podcast than to have more of precisely that. I think I think healthy intergenerational conversations in our particular moment in history are rare. Truly healthy, truly enriching, as you're saying, like ears fully open. It's hard to do. I mean, I can feel it even talking with you guys. We have a great relationship. I can feel it as I'm talking to you. Like, there are moments when I feel as if I'm entering into almost foreign language.
Mm.
And it's this is important. So, yeah, I think we need to learn how to wayfare together. I mean, not to cliche it, but it's that's what we want to do.
Yeah, it makes me reflect as well on the church community
Mm-hmm.
and how that or other intergenerational communities are very important and not built up. The church is, I think there's a lot of church fallout in the modern times from across all living generations, honestly, which is a travesty on all fronts. And I think having that, I mean, it was a great blessing. I mean, that's how we even have this conversation is the pastor, but you're an older guy at our church. You guys are related, so it's not the best example, but there are other people, and it's like we have a church community, and there's so much value to that. Like, I'll be on whatever social media site, and I don't know, like there'll be a post, and it's like, why is like a 35-year-old hanging out with a 17-year-old? That's weird. And it's like, that's like mentorship.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's so valuable.
Yeah.
It can be weird.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not by necessity weird.
Well, and if it is, then we're sort of doomed because
Yeah.
if the 17-year-old can't talk to this 35-year-old, it is helpful sometimes to hear at least hear somebody else's itinerary. And isn't that you don't want to have to do your whole life from scratch?
Sometimes vice versa as well. There's sometimes a
Yes.
freshness that is
Yes.
necessary to keep. Because
Without question.
what's funny, and I don't know if this is something to close with, but I fear that another thing that comes with kind of the generational gap is a kind of stagnancy that can build up and a kind of self-reinforcement in what I would call like the older generation's perspective, where, I mean, like I said, it can get to a point where it's self-reinforcing, and sometimes you need a breath of fresh air, an experience with somebody who is younger, who has had to put less on the line so far.
Yep.
And in some cases probably lose. Yeah.
I think youth are a good reminder to the older generations that culture is supposed to change.
It's how we adapt.
It's supposed to.
Yeah.
And so we need the young to teach us how to do the new culture that is, because the culture is never the kingdom. It's just the latest iteration of the kingdom in a particular form, on the ground in a particular situation with particular conditions. And I don't understand it because it's not my context. You do. And you're going to live the life of God's kingdom in that context.
And, the Lord will find a way, even if all language turns into brain rot. So
He will.
Yeah, and I think that history is cyclical, so we think of culture changes as they just kind of pendulum swing. But it's my perspective, and I think that there's good reason for this, that culture changes and the pendulum goes back and forth on a lot of different items. But ultimately, I think that history is wayfaring as well. And I do think that the changes of culture get us somewhere, which is why, I think leaning into the voice of the youth is so important because that's actually what moves us, not just to whatever is next, but I think to whatever is closer, not to hyperfixate on where we're going, but whatever's closer to the intention, the broader intention of what we would see as God's created order.
Exactly.
And story of humanity. So
yeah, progress is not an illusion.
Yeah.
It's not purely linear, as you're saying, but it is not an illusion. And that's, the young are leading the way into that next iteration of.
Yeah, it's wayfaring. It's stopping somewhere.
Yeah.
It gets ugly at one valley.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
It looks really nice.
Sometimes you gotta stop for gas.
Yeah.
Grab a bite to eat.
Yeah, we're in a car now.
Hit the bathroom. Yeah. Yeah. Put the sticks down. Get behind the wheel now. You don't have to drive anymore in some cases. So
it's true. We'll just
wayfaring with no steering.
We'll be meandering along in self-driving cars.
Listen, we can improve our wayfaring travel conditions.
Dude, we can improve our wayfaring while we drive without it.
That's excellent.
And on that note, listeners, we as we wrap up this first episode, we would love to hear from you. If anything in this conversation has grabbed your attention, you'd like us to talk about it more, or we have a bunch of guests we're hoping to have on here, which should be some good times. So, send us your questions or comments or feedback, and we want to try to do this better, and we'll wayfare with you as well. So thanks for listening.